Always look on the bright side of life. Come on.
Well, good afternoon. It's your old Coffin Dodger back here again. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you're all well and that you are looking after yourselves and looking out for one another. I'd like to put the emphasis today on looking out for one another because we're living in very selfish times, very hedonistic times, and the emphasis is more on looking after ourselves than looking out for one another. And that was quite obvious the last couple of days when within hours shops were emptied of just about everything that that people felt they needed to stockpile for months, basically. But instead of going into the whys and wherefores of stockpiling, I thought I'd just look at the toilet paper phenomenon to start off with and why it was so high on the priority list that people were even taking pictures of their piles of toilet paper, and in a kind of a hunter-gatherer mentality were proud of the achievement.
Life's a piece of shit when you look at it. Life's a laugh and death's a joke, it's true.
Something deeper had to be going on here. Something deeper than the need to stockpile on household goods, because the toilet paper was a priority. And most of us who are coffin dodgers, who are my age, they will have remembered when there was no such thing as toilet paper. So that wasn't really on the top of my shopping list, and I'm sure not on the top of other older people's shopping list. So there had to be something else going on. So I decided to look into the psychology of defecating. And who else to turn to than Mr. Sigmund Freud? He defined the different stages of childhood development and their significance. Freud developed a complicated and influential theory of psychosexual development. He argues that infants go through oral, anal and genital phases between birth and the start of the latency period when they're about 7 or 8 years old. The phases are each named after the orifice which then gives the child most pleasure. And he talks about how certain infants find toilet training harder than others, and this might be due to biological differences. Babies who find it difficult to learn to control their bowels invest anything anal with great importance. They linger on the pot. When they are 3 or 4, they often still wet or soil their beds. Feces has a real fascination for them. Some play with their feces and smear them over toys and furniture. Their feces are them. Such children, Freud claims, have a high degree of anal eroticism. This may all seem utterly remote from life in the city or on Wall Street. I will not comment on the fact that a famous ad for Allied Dunbar was set in a company toilet. In fact, Freud found evidence from a surprising source that linked money and shit. He was fascinated by anthropology and well versed in fables, the Bible and other myths. Of course he would be, because he was Jewish and he would know his Old Testament. He notes that there is an extraordinary tendency for money to be equated with feces. Gold has been called the devil's excrement. In some cultures, shells, which are used as items of value, are called shit of the sea. And another source here says the anal stage is the second stage in Sigmund Freud's theory of psychosexual development, lasting from age 18 months to 3 years. According to Freud, the anus is the primary erogenous zone, and pleasure is derived from controlling bladder and bowel movement. So you see, it's about a lot more than eating and going to the toilet. According to a 2010 survey, the British public considers the flush toilet to be the 9th greatest invention of all time, just above the combustion engine. Toilet paper ranked 22nd and ranked much higher than shoes or email or nappies, and or even a better thing than sliced bread. So what are we looking at here?
Always look on the right side of life.
So we'll start off with the psychopathology. Excretion figures in many kinds of mental disorders, from phobias, obsessions, compulsions and delusions through to tics, impulse control problems and paraphilias. Many bowel and bladder complaints have a large psychological component, as researchers in the fields of psychosomatic medicine and gastroenterology have established. Irritable bowel syndrome, abbreviated IBS, for example, is a very common condition that is characterized by chronic or alternating diarrhea and constipation. Excretion is related to an enormous range of psychological abnormalities. It is also indirectly related to normal personality. You can't exclude that, can you? Freud argued that 3 character traits, the so-called anal triad of orderliness, obstinacy and parsimony, cluster together in adults who recall having derived pleasure for emptying and holding back their bowels as young children. He proposed that these traits, which include a concern with cleanliness, a rigid conscience, stubbornness and tightness with money, represent sublimations or reaction formations against these bowel habits. Tightness with money, that's what that parsimony word means. It's not a word that I would use regularly either. In everyday conversations, you just say miserly or something to that effect. Gender is also a social division that is intimately connected to excretion. Women tend to be more disgusted than men by bodily waste, more censorious of flatulence, more concerned about concealing their smells and sounds during bathroom visits, and more likely to wash their hands afterwards. A common thread running through these differences is that women's excretion is more hidden, emotionally fraught and suppressed than men's. Now look at that. The gender-neutral toilets come to mind when I'm reading that out. How is that going to work? Personally, I'm not all that dependent on toilet paper because I have the privilege of having a bidet, and for that you don't really need toilet paper. So I remember then having travelled in countries where you had to squat down over a hole, even in public transport, in trains in the Middle East and in Asia. They just have holes in the ground, and while the train is curving and careering through the landscape, you have to squat and aim for that hole. So I remember that, and I thought I'd just go and look and see how other cultures deal with the defecation issue. Islamic toilet etiquette, called Qada al-Hajjah, contains rules that predate the invention of toilet paper. According to the strict code, Muslims must squat or sit, but not stand while relieving themselves. They also must remain silent while on the toilet and leave with the right foot while saying a prayer. I wonder why they have to do that. The anus must be washed with water using the left hand after defecating. Similarly, the penis or vulva must be washed with water with the left hand after urinating. This washing is known as istinja and is commonly done using a vessel sometimes known as a batna. I see here in another question and answer forum that even though Muslims do use toilet paper, they must always wash the bum and the private parts after using the toilet roll. The toilet roll alone is not acceptable for our prayers to be valid, unless if there is no water to be found for miles around. Every Muslim must wash themselves with water before doing the wudu, no matter what the amount of toilet roll you use. And they also suggest, if there is no toilet paper available, to use clay. They also have an instrument that looks something like a shower, and it's called a shataf in Arabic, and it exists in almost all Muslim houses, and it cleans almost 100% of waste that could remain on the body. And in which case you then use toilet paper to dry the water off.
When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps. Just purse your lips and whistle.
So I'm going to look now and see what it's like in India. In India it was much the same scenario as in the Middle East. It would be a hole in the ground, and we always carried, we Westerners, we always carried toilet paper with us. Yes, and it still seems to be the same that squat toilets in India don't use toilet paper but rather water to rinse areas that come into contact with waste. Because toilet paper typically isn't used, a spray hose or a bucket of water is the only source. The bathroom should either have a spray hose for cleaning or a bucket of water with a bowl or a mug. And it says, also I see just a headline here, nearly 1 billion people still defecate outdoors. Outdoors they use a vessel called a lotta. It's a water container traditionally made of brass, but these days more often of plastic. In 2015, the United Nations called for an end to open defecation by 2030. It's not impossible to make great strides. Vietnam, for example, has all but eliminated the practice over the past few decades. Achieving the global milestone, number 6 in the UN's list of Sustainable Development Goals, would radically improve public health. Diseases caused by poor sanitation and unsafe water kill more children, some 1.4 million per year, than measles, malaria and AIDS combined. It would also help alleviate poverty and hunger and improve education. So that would be desirable, wouldn't it? Archaeologists and anthropologists have found that in ancient Rome, what was considered to be a very modern facility, the communal toilet, they were equipped with stakes, with long stakes, on which natural sponge was fixed to the end of it, and buckets of water were there available to dip these sponges into and to clean the butt. But it has been found that these people were riddled with worms. With that said, defecating in the open is as old as humankind. I mean, when I was a child, we didn't have a toilet inside. We went outside and we used grass and moss. Later on, we used newspaper till we got running water and an inside bathroom. I've just done another search and I have actually found an article on the psychology behind why toilet paper, of all things, is the latest coronavirus panic buy. And Stephen Taylor, who is a clinical psychologist and author of The Psychology of Pandemics, which takes a historic look at how people behave and respond to pandemics. Compared to past pandemics, the global response to the novel coronavirus has been one of widespread panic. On the one hand, the response is understandable, but on the other hand, it's accessible. Taylor, a professor and clinical psychologist at the University of British Columbia, told CNN, "We can prepare without panicking." When people are told something dangerous is coming, but all you need to do is wash your hands, the action doesn't seem proportionate to the threat, he said. Special danger needs special precautions. And he also says here, people see images of panic buyers, assume there's a reason to panic, and buy up supplies too. People, being social creatures, we look to each other for cues of what is safe and what is dangerous, he said. And when you see someone in the store panic buying, that can cause a fear contagion effect. And he says it's natural enough to want to over-prepare. So not to worry too much about that. Supermarkets in Australia are largely selling out of toilet paper due to novel coronavirus fears. An Australian newspaper even printed out 8 extra pages in a recent edition to serve as emergency toilet paper. But the US Department of Homeland Security advises Americans to keep at least 2 weeks' worth of food, toiletries and medical supplies on hand anyway. But Taylor said most people don't. So when health officials publicly advise to stock up, they may take it to the extreme. He goes on to say here that the people who are stocking up on supplies are thinking about themselves and their family, of course, and what they need to do to prepare. But they're not thinking of healthcare workers, sick people, or even regular folks who might run out of toilet paper sometime soon. They just want to take care of themselves. It's all due to this wave of anticipatory anxiety, Taylor said. People become anxious ahead of the actual infection. They haven't thought about the bigger picture, like what are the consequences of stockpiling toilet paper. But people only act that way out of fear, he said, and that purchasing toilet paper returns a sense of control to what seems like a helpless situation. If it gives them a feeling that they have done everything that they could, it might free them to think about other things than coronavirus. It might even free them up to think of others, not just themselves. And I personally am very happy to see that the shops that I frequent anyway have put a restriction on the amount of purchases I can take out at any one time. I wonder if anybody will have the audacity to try and make a profit from their surplus toilet paper. I hope not. But on a lighter note, it might be interesting to go out on the street corner and try and sell your toilet paper per piece, like 50 cents per piece, and that'd be a good bit of money per toilet roll, but hopefully not. But I did hear a cute story about a boy at some school or other. He was sent home for the day after being discovered selling hand sanitizer usage from his own bottle. He was charging, I think it was 10 cents or 20 cents per hand wash. So I'm going to read one or two more things here just to finish off for today. And I just want to come back again to the relationship between feces and money. And I find here we also know about the superstition which connects the finding of treasure with defecation. And everyone is familiar with the figure of the shitter of ducats. And in German, I think it was a German invention or a German thought, so it's called Dukatenscheißer. Indeed, even according to ancient Babylonian doctrine, gold is the feces of hell. Thus, in following the usage of language, neurosis, here as everywhere, is taking words in their original significant sense, and where it appears to be using a word figuratively, it is usually simply restoring its old meaning. The original erotic interest in defecation is, as we know, destined to be extinguished in later years. That's what Freud was saying about the childhood phases, the anal phase and the oral phase. In those years, the interest in money makes its appearance as a new interest which has been absent in childhood. This makes it easier for the earlier impulsion, which is in process of losing its aim, to be carried over to the newly emerging aim. Now that's deep psychoanalysis. But I heard as well that it comes to mind now that people were stocking up on condoms and I suppose any form of contraception that they could get hold of. And that brings me back as well to the title of this podcast, which is Hedonism and Poo. So married couples have no need for condoms if they're faithful to each other. Condoms are only needed by those who practice random sex, who use prostitutes, who don't want to leave a trace if they are criminally, sexually active. So there is basically no need for condoms on a greater scale, not on the scale that they sell out first and foremost, along with toilet paper. And don't think that old coffin dodgers know nothing about sexuality. Sexuality stays right up to your last breath. We're all still sexual. We all still have erotic thoughts and eroticism in our partnership. So don't think I don't know what I'm talking about. But you see, when something like this happens, we revert to animal instincts. It's like the fight or flight reactions that we are all endowed with. We either face a situation and fight it, or we take flight, we run. In the animal world, that instinct is prevalent. You have the predator animal, you have the prey, you have those who flee when they're attacked or when danger is approaching. They just flee into the forest or whatever. And you have those who stand, turn around and fight. So it's the same. It's the same survival modus that we are faced with. Our basic instincts are activated and we live by those for survival. But we Christians, that's if you are a Christian, if you're not, you might interest you as well. Anyway, we have our other faculties as well. We have the ability to think. We are spiritual creatures. And everybody has these abilities. It's just that they have forgotten to use them. We believe in the Holy Spirit. We believe in God and the Trinity, in the fact that God is looking after his own. We've had the prophets who have told us what to do and when to do it, but we don't listen. Many Christians don't listen. But a Christian lives by the rules of God. Firstly, the Ten Commandments. And when it comes to situations like this, we rely on God to guide us through. We rely on God to give us courage. We rely on God to be with us in times of persecution. That's why you don't hear a lot of persecuted Christians complaining. They're not politically active as a rule. They believe in God. That is their mission. And our mission is to show other people the light, to warn other people as well. As prophets, we are baptized as priests, prophets, and as kings and queens. So we are rulers over our own thoughts. We are rulers over our own instincts. We are royal. So we have the power of royalty to rule over our own life. Not be driven by instincts like animals, and to defend ourselves, to take up the armour of Christ, to defend ourselves against the attacks of evil and of Satan. And remember, I told you in one of the previous podcasts that the oiling with chrism at our baptism and again at our confirmation has to do with fighting off evil. In ancient Rome, there used to be these games in the Colosseum where the gladiators fought with one another. And to make it more difficult for the opponent, each of them smeared themselves with oil, the whole body. And that way the opponent couldn't get a grip. It made it even more difficult to grapple with one another. And that is actually behind the oiling with chrism of Christians. Because we Christians, we are gladiators. We are fighting against evil. We are fighting off evil. And we need to activate that chrism in our spirit to prevail and to be victorious as Christ commanded us. So on that note, I will love you and leave you as usual. And look after yourselves and do look out for one another. Do look out for your neighbour. And your neighbour is all these people that you know, that you come in contact with, and even the stranger walking down the road. Bye-bye for now.